Have you ever watched a culture initiative start really strong, only to see the same old patterns come back a few months later? For a while, things look better. People are using a new language, leaders are making visible effort, meetings feel more effective, and you feel hope that something is finally shifting. And then pressure hits, a staffing shortage, budget cuts, leadership changes, a crisis that really stresses the whole system. And suddenly, the old patterns are back. People get more guarded, and communication decreases. Accountability gets messy, and everybody's energy drops. And the question leadership is left with is, why didn't this stick? In many healthcare organizations, the answer is not that the culture work was bad. It's that the work was aimed at the surface while the deeper architecture stayed the same. And that's what this episode is about. Why culture is rarely the source of the problem, and why culture work often fails when the layers above it have not changed. So let's start with what culture actually is, because most organizations define it too loosely. Culture is not your value statement. It's not your vision. It's not your leadership language. It's not what the organization says it believes in. Culture is what actually happens over and over again, especially under pressure and stress. It's what gets tolerated, what gets rewarded, what gets ignored, and what gets subtly punished. These repeated patterns become the real operating truth of the organization. It tells people what is actually safe here, what matters here, what happens when things get hard. So here's the key point. Culture is not what an organization values. It is what an organization tolerates or does repeatedly. And what it tolerates is being shaped by the layers above it. And those layers are identity, regulation, psychological safety, and communication. Culture sits below all four of those layers, which means culture itself is not the source. It is the output that changes everything. Because if culture is the output, you do not change it by working on the output by itself. You change it by changing what's actually producing it. This is why culture programs often begin with real energy. People are like, yes, there's a new language, new conversations, new expectations, visible effort from leadership, and the shift is real. It matters. And people are not pretending. They genuinely want things to improve. But underneath it, the deeper patterns may still be exactly the same. The same identity patterns, the same urgency, the same safety problems, the same communication filters. And for a while, that new language sits on top of the old system. But then the pressure, the stress comes back. And guess what? Pressure and stress always comes back. And when it does, people do not operate from the new language. They operate from the deeper pattern, the one the architecture has been teaching for years. That's why the early energy fades. Not because the program was wrong or bad, not because people weren't really sincere, but because the intervention was aimed at the surface, while the real drivers of culture stayed untouched. The culture work changed the conversation, but it did not change the architecture. So when the system gets tested, the architecture wins. I want to say this very directly. Most culture programs are aimed at the culture layer, such as values workshops, engagement initiatives, surveys and action plans, team building, leadership behavior frameworks, and all of that work is focused on the fifth layer of the cascade. But the fifth layer is downstream of 4 other layers. So the organization is trying to change the result without changing what is causing it. And that is the problem. So if the identity layer is producing a leader who feels they must always have the answers, then asking that leader to be more open will only go so far. They may manage it for a while, but under pressure, they'll return to the deeper pattern. If the regulation layer is producing chronic urgency, then asking teams to be more collaborative will only go so far. People do not become more open when the whole system feels tight. If psychological safety is low, then asking people to speak up more is asking them to do something that the climate has already taught them is risky. If communication is filtered, then the trust and alignment the culture work is trying to build will sit on top of incomplete information. And when the gaps show up later, trust really takes a hit. So this is not mainly a criticism of the people running culture programs. Most of them are very skilled. Most of them are trying to help. The limitation is structural. You cannot sustainably change culture without addressing what's producing it. So what does create lasting culture change? It starts upstream. It starts with the architecture above culture. When a senior leader becomes clear about their own patterns under pressure, the culture starts shifting. Not because they announced a new culture, but because the signal above the culture layer changed. When the regulation layer becomes more stable, then urgency stops driving everything, and people then gain more room to think, and that changes how they behave with each other. When psychological safety increases in real terms, not just on paper, people start bringing forward real concerns earlier. And this changes what the organization talks about and how it responds. When communication becomes more accurate, decisions start matching reality much more closely. And you can imagine that reduces cynicism in the team. It reduces the gap between what people see on the ground and what leadership acts on. And that begins to change culture in a way that actually sticks. So lasting culture change is a downstream outcome of upstream work. Get the identity, regulation, safety, and communication working better, and the culture will shift naturally. If you leave those layers untouched, the culture will keep snapping back no matter how good the program is. So in the next episode, I'll be going into the decision layer. Why smart executives' decisions fall apart on the way out of the room, and why it's almost never just an implementation problem. If this episode gave you an aha or brought something into focus for you, then the executive leadership briefing below will give you a simple map of the full cascade. And if you want to keep going, I will see you on the next episode.